Alright, everybody, let's get started on the next installment of the series, and that's character creation. We're going to go beyond the surface level material, which focuses more on the visual aspects of character design, which is something a lot of new writers focus on, especially those that are influenced by comics, anime, video games, and so forth, and instead focus on how character creation influences storytelling and vice versa. So let's get started. So these are some things to keep in mind when you are creating characters. The information that you're providing to the reader about the character needs to be relevant. So is it relevant? Are you using too much detail? Can you get away with less? What obstacles will this character face? Is there a logical progression as the character develops? And is reader sympathy, empathy being developed? So is the information relevant to the reader and to the story? So basically, you want to focus on details that are moving the story forward and kind of make that your what you're going to focus on the most, because detail that just goes over the top, detail that's just there to kind of more as a way to wow the reader with your by showing how creative you can be with the superficial aspects of a character design may seem cool to you, and you really want to, like with other aspects of storytelling and world building, you really want to just throw in all this crazy detail because you want to make the reader as enthusiastic as you are about your character and the characters that you've come up with. But that's not necessarily the information that's really important for the reader to understand the character, to understand what they're doing in the story, how they're changing as the story goes on, and so on and so forth. So focus on details that are necessary for reader understanding. We don't want to leave out detail that's going to leave readers confused about what's taking place, and that goes to all aspects of storytelling. So yeah, when in doubt, be efficient. Less is more. We don't really need a 3 or 4 paragraph description on a character, every thing about them from head to toe, kind of trivial information that really is more a process of the writers brainstorming, that like I said with the whole iceberg analogy, where you have surface level and what's sticking above the surface, and then everything beneath the surface, which is basically all of our research and brainstorming, and that kind of needs to stay off the page unless it's absolutely necessary. That's a good rule to live by when it comes to writing genre fiction, especially in fantasy and sci-fi, where there's a lot of unusual character descriptions, and kind of especially in alien fantasy worlds and things where things are totally different than they are here, and you'll run into different beings that look and act differently than your average human. And remember that description can affect pacing if you're just, which falls into the realm of the info dump. So, and some writers get away with it. I mean, George R. Martin's a good example. He really likes to go into great detail when a character shows up, especially if they're, someone that's, focused on, and not just a secondary character, whether what they're wearing, and, some of their mannerisms. And to me, sometimes it can get a bit tedious, but it doesn't really break immersion in the story, and it doesn't make me want to put the book down out of frustration. So just, get an idea when you're reading back your writing and your character description sentences and paragraphs, and just kind of pay attention to those things if it's affecting pacing or not. If the reader's sitting there, okay, all right, that's not fine. Let's get on with the story. Let's get on to the next part. I don't need to know all this stuff. Or maybe you can, or they're thinking you can sprinkle in a little bit as time goes on. Then you may have an issue with the pacing and or giving too much information at one time. So yes, can you get away with less detail? That's a good question to ask as you're writing, with all aspects of the storytelling part, not just with character creation. So yeah, I mean, it's why would you want to write more than you need to? Why would you want to increase your word count, page count, and if it's information that's not really going to make a difference, and it's not going to really push the story forward, if it's just there to kind of bloat the story and all the writing? I mean, it's better to be efficient and and it saves you time and energy and effort when you can just get away with as little as possible. And especially when you're starting out and you're a new writer, like I'm definitely a new in the sense that I'm not a seasoned author. I mean, I really need to focus on getting the what's important out there, and not try to get bogged down in attempting to create this amazing flowery prose when I haven't really polished the fundamentals as much as I should. Don't You're not really trying to wow people with your imagination and your great use of a thesaurus, and trying to be a poet when you're just starting out. So keep that in mind. So character appearances, the details, keep them to a minimum, unless you're going into greater detail that's vital to a reader understanding. So basically, if you have a character, let's say they're from a certain culture that is not isn't one that's taken from our world, and they have a fashion or a hairstyle or something like that which has a social and cultural significance. I think the samurai would be an example from our world. I believe there's certain hairstyles that they had that were only allowed by the samurai because it indicated rank and society and their status and so forth. So if you have something like that that someone has a bizarre looking kind of haircut or wardrobe or everything, but it has a function other than fashion, and it signifies that they're of a certain social order or military rank or anything like that, then that kind of information you can go into greater detail with. But I wouldn't write it in an exposition fashion. It's basically something that you can let a character explore through dialogue. If you go to let's say your character goes to some foreign nation and never has interacted with these people before, sees a group of the soldiers walking around, tell they're soldiers because they have a sidearm or carrying spears or something like that. And you have the native guide, if you will, and your main character is kind of looking at these guys, these warriors, and with kind of confused, and because maybe they have some kind of weird haircut or bizarre, colorful outfits that he or she's never seen before. Well, the native tour guide, if you will, could easily just so I see you're confused, and then go into a little bit of dialogue with like such and such is representative of a warrior reaching a certain part of their training, and it's like with the Jedi trainees have that kind of goofy little side lock or something like that, or braid or something like that. So you can go into that into kind of a detail, and get across really quick without having to give a big backstory to everything. And even then, if you have, let's say, your character befriends one of these warriors, and let's say he's in the beginning of his training and he's got like a certain hairstyle, and we go and towards the end of the story, this warrior that your character befriends goes and does something heroic or brave, and reaches the pinnacle of his warrior training, and then his hairstyle changes to something else that signifies that he's a master or something like that. Well, that has a great significance within the story itself through those visual details that we knew about beforehand. So that stuff like that is important. But if it's just a fashion statement and it doesn't really have anything tying into cultural significance other than it's kind of unusual, you don't really need to spend too much time on it. So hopefully that makes sense. And this is something that I think works well, at least as an example, and that I've tried to pass on to people on message forums, is that when somebody walks by, or like I work in a field where I interact with a lot of people in the public, and I see people are the same people multiple times, throughout the days or weeks or whatever. So usually I'll just from first meeting, I'll see something about them that is recognizable immediately, that I take away from when they leave. So let's say somebody walked through in front by you, and there's, let's say they were like 7 foot tall, and shoulders as broad as a barn, and had like a a green and blue mohawk and a huge foot long goatee that was red or something like that. I mean, you don't need to get an idea of that person. There's just a very few things you have to really grasp on to give an idea. And so let's say that person walks by, and then somebody comes by a little bit later and says, "Have you seen so and so?" And he goes, "So and so." And no, I'm not sure. Oh, he says, "Oh, really tall, big, dyed hair and dyed goatee." That's, and then you immediately are going to think of that person, because how many people that have come across that day even remotely looked like that. So pick a handful of details that are the most vital to getting a picture of who that character is, and then leave the rest up to the reader's imagination. And as you'll see in the next one, like I said, allow the audience to fill in the details with their imagination. Some people like vivid descriptions, and other people like to get a basic grasp on what this character looks like, and then they're just going to let their imagination run wild. Some people prefer that because that does increase reader immersion. And sometimes I mean, personally, I don't mind having character art, except for on a lot of fantasy cover art, especially Wheel of Time and some of the older ones, older series. Some of the character art is really kind of lame to me. I think it's kind of a bit of a letdown when you see what they look like. So sometimes it's better to just keep the picture that you have in your head of that character, given what the author described in the book. And use actions to provide detail when possible, which is the show don't tell, or demonstrate don't explain is kind of how I like to use it. So if somebody's super strong or fast, or has certain is acrobatic or has great dexterity or anything like that, they can perform an action that demonstrates this. It doesn't need to be said ahead of time that so and so is super strong. If that character goes and lifts a 200-pound boulder on his shoulder like it's a small child and throws it 40 feet, that says more in a quick action than a paragraph of detail trying to explain just how strong they are, and how describing their muscles, and and the size, how their arms are like tree trunk, or legs are like tree trunks, their arms are whatever. So actions can get across quite a bit without, and they're quick. I mean, you just write so and so does this, and like, oh wow, that character's really strong, or that character's really quick. They outran, somebody was chasing them, or they climbed up the side of a building, like Spider-Man or something like that. You get that does in one demonstration of their physical prowess, or whatever or their martial prowess. Let's say somebody it's like a gunslinger, Wild West, it's like like Clint Eastwood, fires off like all 6 rounds of his Colt pistol, and takes out all the bandits, in one quick motion, just boom 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 boom, and they're all dead. You didn't need to write a paragraph or a intro leading up to about how masterful or how deadly a gun fighter they are. I mean, that little description of what they did does plenty. So keep that in mind. Actions demonstrate things and save a lot of time. So yeah, keep that in mind. That will definitely help kind of streamline what you're doing. So obstacles are basically at the forefront of stories and character development, and why we care about characters, why we don't care about characters. A character has to have an obstacle or a goal or something, and has to overcome something to get to that goal. That's kind of the classics way of storytelling and character development. Limitations are very important, because a character that is completely without limitations is probably going to be pretty boring. If you can imagine, Superman, like especially the modern version of Superman, who's just like overpowered beyond belief. But even if you only had Superman and he was on Earth and there were no other superheroes or supervillains around, it was just Superman and in your everyday metropolitan big city crime element, pickpockets and purse stealers and all that kind of stuff. It'd be pretty boring. I mean, Superman really wouldn't have much to overcome or to challenge him, and that would just make for very boring storytelling. But also, limitations will dictate how a person will have to overcome obstacles, and that's usually how I try to write, especially with female characters, because I'm not really a big fan of the whole girl power. Girls can just are just as physically dominant as men, even though the men depicted are obviously more physically dominant and superior than they are. So with their physical limitations, I like to write in other strengths. And I always use this example of Ellen Ripley or Sarah Connor in the Aliens and Terminator franchises, where they're kick-ass female protagonists, but they have to use a combination of physical ability, courage, and wit. So if you lack one thing, then something else needs to come in to make up for that. So, and even if you're physically dominant, that means that there has to be either obstacles that you challenge that physical ability, or like if you have like Conan or something like that, or or obstacles have to go against them in the way that their physical attributes won't matter. Then they have to find another way around. So limitations and strengths and things that you can play with, but they're going to dictate how a character can problem solve. Like I said, if they're perfect in all ways, like like this overpowered Superman that we have now, then we're not going to be really in fear for them or worried that they're going to succeed or not. So exactly how will these limitations affect how they solve problems? And remember that characters that can't fail are not interesting to most readers. That's like, if you have a character in a story that can't fail, then what's the point? It's like watching a character go around and just constantly achieve everything without failing or learning anything. And they have to fail at some point, or it's like we don't have any feeling that they may be possibly in danger of losing their life or losing something they care about, or so on and so forth. So they have to be able to fail at something throughout their course of the story to develop, become more than they were when they started, and to provide some drama and some tension in the story. Because we don't want Mary Sue's or Gary Stu's or any of these other kind of characters that just can't fail. It's just really boring. And like I said, no conflict means a boring story. There's got to be conflict. That's just at the heart of any good story, depending on whether it is internal or external conflict or obstacles. It can be an internal obstacle like fear of something, or an external obstacle like a mountain, and somebody's going to climb that mountain, and that obstacle is physically in front of them, and they have to overcome it. And then you could also have the combination of internal obstacles like fear of heights or whatever. So yeah, your obstacles can come from within or from without, or a combination of both. So finally on this, character development should be reflected in the overcoming of obstacles. They should be changed in some way after having done something. Otherwise, the obstacle they overcame is kind of meaningless. If our character is like a Rocky type, from the Stallone movies, and he fights let's say, it's like a amateur boxer, and fights his way up to fight the champ, and he, beats the champ and wins. But if nothing changes, if he's still the same person at heart that he was when he, first started on this journey, then, there wasn't any kind of character development, so it kind of falls flat. So there's got to be some kind of a change that comes from overcoming these obstacles. And these are more questions just to keep in mind. Are themes in the story tied directly to the obstacles a character faces? Like I said, with the whole mountain climbing or fear of heights, overcoming fear is a real basic theme that you can find everywhere. So these are just things to keep in mind as you're brainstorming the character. Because remember, the obstacles the character has to face are at the focal point or the center of the story, typically. And this is a big thing that I focus on when it comes to plot, when it comes to world building, anything is logical progression, is cause and effect. So that something you need to keep in mind, cause and effect. If one thing happens, was the result, does the result make sense, and does when another thing happens, does the result make sense, and does this kind of following a progression? With you don't want to run into any kind of logical inconsistencies, because they can be a nightmare, especially in very detailed, convoluted plots. You find plot holes. That's where you find plot holes, basically. And plot holes are a big red flag and a real downer to a lot of readers that are super into stories. And sometimes when they find these things, it's just all that gets talked about. With a story that may otherwise be good, but those glaring things always seem to kind of just pop out. And when characters don't act in a way that makes sense, and their decisions aren't affected by what they go through, and they make weird decisions that make no sense to the reader, given what we know about them up to that point, it can really just cause a reader to just toss the book aside and give up on your writing and your story, because some things like that are unforgivable to a lot of readers. So this is one that you should focus on, and that is if our past experiences and prior decisions affecting how the character acts in the present. If they go through, let's say, if someone tries to start a business and they keep failing over and over and over and never learn, let's say almost in a comedic way, we're going to start to wonder if this character is just a complete moron or not. But if, let's say, they fail the first time, they make some adjustments and they do a little bit better, and they make some more adjustments and they do a little bit better. But even if they fail, but they're getting closer and closer and closer based on this learning experience they have, then all of a sudden at some point they become a very successful business person within this, the context of this story. Then yeah, that makes sense. We're seeing that these past experiences are shaping who they are. They're shaping their decisions, and this can come from how characters interact with other kinds of people. Like relationships are a perfect example. If it's like a romance and you have these characters that never learn, they always go and fall in love with the person that's wrong for them or whatever. We see that in real life all the time, and they just never learn. I mean, a lot of people are just going to sit there and just bash their heads with the book and say, why is this idiot not realizing that this kind of person they keep falling for is the reason why they're miserable all the time? So we hope at the end of the story of the romance that they end up finding somebody that fits them and who they are, and that this person has enough self-awareness at the end to realize, yeah, I need to avoid being around those kinds of people, and this is the kind of person that's the best fit for me. So things like that. I mean, even basic things. Someone that little kid eats a poison mushroom and gets sick, and then 2 chapters into the story further down, he finds the same poison mushroom, looks at it, and then eats it again, gets sick. It's like, well, the kid's an idiot, obviously. We would hope that he would see the poison mushroom and wrinkle his nose and go yuck and throw it away. So that can affect and apply to all levels of decision making, from don't touch it because it's hot, to this recognizing deception in people, and recognizing characteristics and traits due to bad experiences. Like personally, I had a business venture and was basically hoodwinked by a sociopath that took me for all I was worth and created a lot of financial chaos in my life. And if I was a character in a story and I didn't learn from that and it repeated itself, the readers are going to think I'm a complete buffoon. But if hypothetically, if that character of me ran into somebody that was of a similar shady reputation and gave off the same kind of vibes of the person that it had screwed me over to begin with, and I said, hey, I know you're kind, I know what you're like, get the hell out of here, then they're going to be like, good, he realized it and he learned and he grew from this. So all that life experiences, and this is where a lot of your own personal life experiences and dealing with people can come in. So definitely something to keep in mind. So yeah, do their choices make sense given what the reader know about them? So if someone has been making, intelligent decisions all along, they're very wise, they're very practical, they don't make these really rushed, um, chaotic choices on a whim. And if all of a sudden they do that and we don't have any reason to see why that would be the case, then we're going to kind of go, well, what the hell? So again, with the logical progression, character choices should make sense based on what we know about the characters. And unless, like, you have a situation where a character's kind of pulling a fast one on the other character, say, let's say a side character, a sidekick or something, pulls a double cross on the protagonist, and we're like, well, that's not in keeping with what we know about them. Well, he was a secret agent all along. That makes sense because we were being led along with this false sense that this person was this kind of person, and then they did the flip and double crossed, and now we see what they really are. So these things should make sense. And this, like I said, what I was talking about with how someone being looked at as a complete idiot, how you act given your private experiences in life, and like how the decision making you have now based on how you've come along throughout your own life or as a character through a story. It says a lot about you as a person. So if you want your audience, your readers, to think this character is a complete fool, then just have them repeat the same mistakes and never learn. If you want to have them look like they're someone that's maturing and becoming more self-aware and wiser, then have them make improved decisions based upon what's happened to them in the past. And this is a big one, and it's like I said, if you lose reader sympathy when it comes to a character, that can be a point of no return for a reader, and they put the book down, and which means they may not be interested in reading anything else you have to put out. So yeah, losing reader sympathy, empathy with these kind of foolish choices can be a big no-no. So try to keep this logical progression going, unless of course we're doing like a double cross, or someone's in a situation where it's understandable that they would make a very rash decision, like say someone, their family member's been held hostage or something like that. But you can't really just throw these weird kind of uncharacteristic decisions just out there on a whim, or you're gonna start to get people a little bit annoyed. And readers do expect character growth of some kind, at least in the main characters. I mean, you have paragon characters, like Gandalf in Lord of the Rings, who's basically reached his level of character development. He's there as the guide. He's not there as the main character going through the quest that's going to grow over time, like Frodo is. So if your main character is basically just staying at this one level the whole time, and is nothing really is changing about them, or they're not growing or learning, then that also can be pretty boring. It's more fit for maybe your average comic book, serial or something where you just have some, superheroes battling it out. But it's, over the long arc of the story, you do expect some kind of character growth, even for a comic book character. So is reader sympathy and empathy being developed? Do we care about what is happening to a character? Again, this goes back to the choices they're making, what's happening to them. If we don't care about the characters, then we're not going to read the story. That's pretty basic. Characters, for like I said, other than horror and other kind of first person type of storytelling, or even, horror can be third person, but where it's more of the emotional, psychological experience of fear, or or of the unknown or the supernatural, where that's the focus, and the characters just there as kind of the vehicle to we can use to explore that headspace. People want to care about these characters. They want to hate the bad guys and like the good guys. And if a lot of people, in a lot of reviews that I've seen on a lot of stories, it's like they just don't. The reason why they don't connect and give the book a good review is they just hate the main character. And that Patrick Rothfuss is, I think it's character's name is Koth. In Name of the Wind, I think is the series, or the Kingkiller Chronicles, I think is the name of the series, and it's pretty or I don't know, not say divisive, but it's pretty divided readership of people that like the main character and other that completely hate the main character. So if people hate your main character and the character's supposed to be likable, then either you just have a unique take, or maybe you're just not writing it very effectively. But he's made a lot of money, so what do I know? Character goals and how they will achieve them is something you need to keep in mind as you're writing your story and coming up with characters. Like I said, I've explained why, obstacles and whatnot are important. But remember, character design is very important just in the storytelling process in general, because your whole story is about this person to some degree, and even unless you have like multiple main characters or viewpoint characters or whatever. But this is the focal point of the whole story, so you need to really spend a lot of time focusing on and narrowing down specifically what these characters, what their goals are, how they're going to achieve them, and remember, bring into context the limitations. If they want to achieve them and they have certain limitations, then they're going to have to develop their strengths, and they're going to have to problem solve a different way because they've got disadvantages and advantages, and that can totally shape the way a story is told. I mean, if it's a female protagonist and she's 5 foot, 100 pounds, and doesn't is no kung fu warrior, samurai, knight in shining armor type of badass, she's going to have to approach her goals and overcoming her obstacles in a specific manner that's believable, unless you just want to go full on girl power, which I'm not a fan of. And like I said, with any kind of character, so always keep that in mind when you're coming up with the character, and you're also thinking of their strengths and weaknesses. This goes back to the previous examples, the previous topics, where are we understanding the thought process behind the character's choices, and that that should be pretty clear. And this is important too, especially when it comes to villains, which a lot of people kind of get annoyed with villains that are evil for the sake of evil. When you understand someone's thought process, and we get a better idea of why they make the choices they make, even if we completely disagree with them from a moral standpoint, it lets us get into their headspace a little bit more. It makes them more compelling. It makes them more interesting, because even if we're morally opposed, it still may challenge us at an intellectual level to at least hear their side of the story, or at least kind of try to comprehend why they've done what they've done, especially with, like I said, with villains. And like I said, that will make your villains, you don't want them one-dimensional. You give them a multi-dimensionality by not just making them the cliche Dark Lord that just I'm here to destroy the the world, and I'm evil because evil is great, and blah blah blah, unless you're doing like a satire or something like that. Like I said, the reader doesn't have to agree with ethics or morals behind a character's decision in order to develop sympathy. And it doesn't mean you sympathize in an emotional or moral way where you feel bad for them in the sense that you agree with them. I mean, you can feel bad for a villain who's doing horrible things but thinks they're doing it for the right reasons. I mean, you can pity them, or at least have some level of sympathy, even though you would you are disgusted by the means to the end, or the end, they're the end justifying the means and so forth, of especially if it's some kind of a dictator or tyrant that's ruling over a kingdom. And like I said before, readers may lose interest if they feel there is no rhyme or reason behind the decisions the character makes. Again, talking about villains that are evil for the sake of evil, and just randomly kill people or burn villages down and things like that. It's really stale and unimaginative, and it kind of just smacks of amateurism or amateurish ambition and understanding of character development. So yeah, we want to have characters that are multidimensional and are interesting to the readers. So yeah, that's all for the character creation video. Hopefully that was of interest to you guys. I'm not sure what I'll do next. I may focus on outlining and kind of a basic approach to outlining, from the most basic to super in-depth, and just give an example of how I outline, and hopefully that will be of some use to people, and they will be able to apply it to their own writing. So that will be the next video most likely, and until then, everybody, take it easy and enjoy your writing.